Alright, welcome back to the Coach Nick Hill on Instagram. If you're one of the half dozen people who watches these videos, I appreciate you. Thanks for coming back. Today we're doing training talk number 2, and we're talking about my build up into the 2018 Walt Disney World Marathon. So you'll see here on the board I kind of have it outlined. We're going to break this one up into 3 segments. We're going to talk about the general structure of the build. We're going to talk about some key workouts that I think were important and gave me a lot of confidence going into the race. And then the third one we'll talk about the actual race itself. So segment 1 here, let's talk about the build-up. As you can see, it's 14 total weeks, starting in about mid-October, lasting into the race itself. The pre-build-up was really a lot of speed work. The week 14, I actually had done a race out in Washington, D.C. called the Navy Mile. And from there, I transitioned right into the marathon build-up. You can see the mileage is all over the place. This is before I got more disciplined with how I structured my own training. As some of you might know, coaching yourself has some pitfalls, and for me, being really disciplined and sticking to a specific cycle and a specific schedule for this build-up was not my best bet. As you can see, the mileage is all over the place. I peaked out at 120, but on average, I was kind of running between 85 to about 100 miles or so. Another thing I did differently throughout this build-up, because this is the only marathon build-up I ever did where we weren't living in altitude. We were living in Tucson, which is closer to 2,000 feet, was I was experimenting with back-to-back workouts. So that was kind of a fun thing. I was just trying to see, how my body would react to that and how I would do with that kind of extra workload. So on about 7 of these weeks, actually, I had done some back-to-back workouts. So day 1, I would do maybe a longer tempo or threshold session, mile repeats, 1Ks, tempo runs. And then the next day I'd come back and do something shorter, usually like 200s or some other type of rep work, or some shorter interval work just to kind of turn it over. The purpose of that for this build-up was A, to see if I could do that kind of work, and B, was to really focus on running hard on tired legs. The other thing this allowed me to do was to give me more space between my early week quality sessions and my long runs. So in a lot of these weeks, you'll see that I was able to get 3 quality runs in instead of 2, or sometimes 2 quality runs in a race, which I think allowed me to get some extra work in. One of the pitfalls there was that this build-up was really up and down. I would have weeks where I would crush it and do really well, and then the next week would kind of be in the toilet and it wouldn't be a good one. So the experiment, I think, in some ways worked because I had a good race at Disney, but in some ways it also backfired. And I think there are a couple reasons for that. One, I don't think I was as disciplined as I should have been in terms of how I structured it. And 2, I just don't think I necessarily placed the workouts in the right places like I should. So overall, I think it was a good build-up, and I learned a ton from it, but there are definitely some things that I could have done better. So hang on here for just a sec. We're going to come back, reset the board, and we're going to talk about some key workouts. All right, we're back, and I've got the key workouts here, so we're going to talk about some of my most important sessions going into the 2018 Walt Disney World Marathon. Every time I go back over this build-up, I'm amazed in some ways, but I'm also yelling at myself for being an idiot because I'll put together 4 good sessions and huge sessions in 10 days, and I have to take the next 3 days off because I felt like crap. So like I said, there was a lot of good and bad here, but here are some of the sessions that gave me a lot of confidence. I think one of the things that I did well that really paid off on race day was I ran a lot of steady states or marathon effort runs, and I would do a big warm-up before those marathon efforts. So on the 3 different ones you see on here, I had done those with either a 5 or a 6 or even a 7-mile warm-up before, so I was completing these on pretty tired legs and finishing up pretty deep into the workout. So the first session here is with 9 weeks to go. That's just a 13-mile run at marathon pace. There was 3-mile warm-up, 3-mile cool down for 19 total on the day. I averaged 5:15 there. So for about 2 months out from the race, I was pretty happy for where I was at and what my goals were. When you fast forward to 5 weeks to go, this one in particular, the top one here, really gave me a lot of confidence because I was able to turn it over at the end. That was 3 by 3 miles at marathon effort. I ran 16 flat, 15:30, and 15:21 with 1 mile easy between those. And then I came back and ran 1 more at threshold pace, which I ran in 14:51. Remember, we're at 2,000 feet, so it's a little bit lower, but I was happy on flat terrain to be able to turn it over. And that gave me a lot of confidence about a month out from the race. Later that week, I had done a workout where I ran 10 miles at an easy pace, and then I came back and did 12 miles at a marathon effort. That one was 5:12 pace average. I was really pumped, A, because that was my second big session that week, and B, that I had improved from 4 weeks earlier when I had done the 13 miles at 5:15 pace. Next, we go to a month to go. This was another big one where I was able to turn it over and get fast on tired legs. It was 2 miles easy, 3 miles marathon, 2 miles threshold, 4 by 1 minute at interval pace, and then another 3 miles at marathon. Between each of those segments, I had to run 1 mile easy. On this one, I ran 15:39, 9:50 for the 2 mile segment, 4:30 pace for the interval segment, and then 15:21 for the last marathon segment. I remember very vividly running on the river path for that last 3 mile segment. Somewhat amazed that I was running as fast as I was, but I came off of that thinking, holy crap, I am definitely getting ready to go. And then the next week, with 3 weeks to go, which is when I typically do my last kind of big sessions, this is a really big week. I did 6 miles easy and then my 16-mile marathon pace, which is always a staple of pretty much every marathon build-up I do. It's kind of like my marathon training run. I do all my nutrition like I'm planning on it. It's just like a dry run to see how things are going. I averaged 5:12 pace for that, and I closed my last mile in 4:56. Needless to say, I was pretty elated after that. I felt great. I was like, holy crap, like I'm definitely ready to roll as long as I don't screw it up here in the last couple weeks. And then later that week, I did my 2 by 6 mile session, which is again a staple of mine. It's actually a Hanson's workout that a lot of us do. I did 3 miles easy, 6 miles at marathon effort, which I ran at 5:11 pace, 1 mile easy, and then a 6 mile, almost a progression from marathon to threshold pace, which I averaged 5:04. And I remember closing those last 2 miles out in like 4:55 and then 4:48 or something like that for the last two, and then another couple miles easy. Once I ran that one and I was able to turn it over with those last couple miles after having that 16 mile steady state in my legs from earlier in the week, I just knew I was ready to roll. I was like, this is it. Everything I do from here on out doesn't really matter. I'm ready to race this race. And these are the sessions that I gained a lot of confidence from going into that 2018 marathon. So we're going to reset the board one more time, and then we're going to quickly just talk about the race itself and how it played out. So hang with us. We're back, and we're talking race day from the 2018 Walt Disney World Marathon. This race happens in January every year. This year it was on January 7th. And that race starts at 5:30 in the morning, which is pretty freaking early, especially coming from the West Coast. It's about 2:30 a.m. West Coast time, so that's a little bit weird for your body and can be a little bit tough to get used to. One of my biggest concerns for this race every year is making sure that I use the bathroom beforehand. For anybody who's run a marathon, that's always important to get that out of the way. Thankfully, this year I did, so I was very relieved and ready to go once the race got started. Another cool thing about this race is that it's dark, at least for the first hour and a half or so. So it's kind of cool. You're running through the parks. There's nobody there. The lights are on. It's kind of a neat experience for sure. And if you're into that kind of thing, I definitely recommend checking it out. The temperature this year was 43 degrees, which is pretty awesome, pretty ideal. In the next 2 years that I ran it, 2019 and 2020, it was not nearly that cool. It was in the 70s with 98 to 99% humidity, which is much more of a bear to deal with. This year it was 43 degrees with 63% humidity, pretty much perfect, no wind. It was really, really nice. Almost chilly at the start, which was pretty awesome. The shoes I wore the Nike Zoom Fly 1. This is not the Vaporfly. It's kind of like the Vaporfly's slower brother. It's got a React midsole with a TPU or a plastic plate on the inside. I love this shoe. It was substantial. I'd like a cushier shoe for the marathon. I'm a bigger guy. I strike hard. This was great. I loved it. Obviously, I have a little bit of attachment to it too because it was the shoe I wore for my first Walt Disney World Marathon win. Spoiler alert. And then the nutrition I used this year, for my gels, I used Goo Roctane. I used the Blueberry Pomegranate, which is a caffeinated one. And I also used, I think, Strawberry Kiwi, which is an uncaffeinated one. I like to have caffeine in my nutrition. I don't like to go overboard. I like to kind of save it for later in the race, so I was alternating between those two. This race does not do like elite bottles or anything like that, so I was just drinking water and then the lemon lime Powerade that they had on course. So let's kind of get into the race itself. So here are my splits from the race, and I'll say right from the get-go that there was a group of maybe 3 to 4 of us throughout the whole time, and it was fun and it was competitive. In this race was Fredison Costa, who's won a bazillion of these. I think he's won 7. He's tied for the most who's ever won in history. There's another Brazilian guy named Vanelson Neves, who was a guy I raced the whole time. We were neck and neck up until about 22 miles. So from a competitive standpoint, it was just a lot of fun. You just knew these guys were good. They were here to show up. They were excited to be out there, so that was definitely kind of neat. So we'll just kind of go through the splits here real quick, and you can see how the race played out. You'll see through the first half marathon, we were incredibly even. We averaged 5:18 pace the whole time, which looking back on it now is amazing. I don't know how we did that, because the race has a lot of turns, and it's not always the smoothest course at sections, but we definitely were conservative early on, which was good. That's how I wanted to race it. I've blown up enough times at the marathon to know that I wanted to go out a little slower and leave a little in the tank. Knowing how my workouts went, I knew I could probably run between 5:10 to 5:15 pace for the full distance. My aim here was to win, and to make sure we did that, I wanted to make sure I could close hard. So going out in a slower pace or a more conservative pace and as evenly was important. You'll see from half marathon to 20, the pace increased. The total average went down to 5:15 pace, but for that 7 miles of racing there, we averaged 5:08 pace. So it got a little hot. One of the guys, Vandelson, really started to try and press and push throughout this point in time. Most of it, I was just kind of hanging off his shoulder and letting him be the aggressor. And then at about 22 miles, once we were exiting the Wide World Sports Complex, I made a little move and opened up a gap. And then from 20 to the finish, I was just trying to hang on and run consistent. I averaged 5:16 pace for that period of time, and I finished in 2:17.52, a 5:15 average. And that's my second fastest marathon that I've ever run. The race for me was incredibly important. I hadn't had a good marathon since 2015 when I PR'd at Grandma's. Everything else had either been dropouts or poor performances. So to come to this race at a place that means a lot to my wife and I, we got engaged here the year before, and to perform well and to run the race I wanted to run really meant a lot. You can see on my face as I crossed the finish line that there's a lot of emotion there, and it was really emotional. It was a victory. Winning is always fun. But to do it here and to do it at this specific event and to kind of finish off what I had started earlier in October, it felt really good, and that kind of galvanized the next couple of years of my running career. And it's a race I still like to run. I ran it in 2019, I ran it again in 2020, and I'm hoping to run it again in 2021. So that's it. So that's going over my 2018 Walt Disney World Marathon build-up. Next week we'll be doing my 2020 build-up. So we'll kind of talk about that, and that was a hot year, so we'll talk specifically how I handled that and what I did to make sure that I was ready to handle those conditions. Thanks for watching. You can follow me on Strava, follow me here on Instagram. The next video coming out will be my weekend review, and that'll be coming out on Sunday. Thanks. Have a wonderful day.